Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined today with Tate in the Hour. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but in all honesty, this summer has been absolutely terrible for films. There hasn't really been all that many films out that we've been interested in seeing, but this is one that I think we were both looking forward to, or very skeptical on whether we enjoy it. This is our review for Sicario 2 Soldado, or Sicario Day of the Soldado, Sicario 2, whatever you want to call it. This movie has like about 3 or 4 different names. It's the sequel to Denis Villeneuve, 2015 original Sicario, which I think we've done a review for on the channel before, and it was probably one of our favorite movies of that year. So yeah, we don't have a plan for this thing. Are we going straight into it, or we should probably give our review on the first movie?
Yeah, the first movie was one of those surprises that I think caught everyone off guard.
Yeah.
I didn't see it at first release. I actually waited a long time until I finally got to see it. I think I saw it the first time I was in Austria, staying out there. But I was completely taken aback by it. It was an amazing film. Really well put together, high tension, great acting, really good film, and it got an Oscar run, didn't it?
Yeah, I'm just having a look here, see what it was nominated for.
It was nominated for Best Picture, if I remember.
The film was nominated for Best Cinematography, Best Original Score, Best Sound Editing at the 88th Academy Awards.
Oh, it wasn't nominated for Best Picture.
So it didn't win it. No, it wasn't nominated for Best Picture. It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was nominated for a decent amount there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to it, because it really was a very high stakes film, and sometimes a lot of American films get a lot of stick, especially from us English, because we want gritty films, like no nonsense kind of. If we want violence and brutality, we don't want someone saying a one-liner after it. Well, we do, but sometimes we want something which is gritty. We want gritty realism.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Sicario really suited the gritty realism that a lot of people were looking for.
Yeah.
Especially with kind of the high tension kind of political affairs that were happening at the time, and that are still happening now. What I can say about this film, without spoiling it, is there is a political edge to it. Of course there is. But in this kind of film, it suits it. It isn't pushing it. And with the kind of ultra violence that I would say was in this film, it still suits it.
Yeah,
it doesn't back away from kind of the heavy subject of brutality and kind of no holds bar, like every single person on the screen could get shot or killed at any second. High stakes affairs that was from the first film.
Yeah, well, it's dealing with the drug cartels, isn't it? And sort of the behind the scenes and the political nature of, you know, spinning stories and these underground operations, trying to smooth everything out. Or even in the case of this movie, starting an all-out gang war in some respects, or even more of like a global war by the end of this movie, probably, without giving too much away. I love that first Sicario movie. I actually rewatched it again yesterday in preparation for this movie, because it had been quite a long while since I'd seen it. And although it's only 2 hours, it's a very involved movie where you really have to pay attention to everything that's going on. There's a lot of nuances in terms of like the political side to the film. Great performances as well. Emily Blunt, sorry, was fantastic in that movie, as well as the supporting characters with Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. I even forgot that Denis Villeneuve directed that movie until it hit the credits last night, because, you know, he's had, you know, gone on to have success with Blade Runner 2049, everything like that. He's probably easily one of the best directors in the business. And the tension in that first movie, there are the key scenes in that movie, probably the one that everyone remembers is the bridge scene. Even now, it is one of the tensest things to watch. It's just a masterclass of directing, of pacing, of sound, of tension. Even the very end of that movie, again, I'm not going to spoil the end of the first Sicario movie, but there's a scene with Benicio del Toro's character which kind of rounds everything off, which is just perfect. And because of that, and rewatching that first movie last night, I was like, this really didn't need a sequel. And I guess this is kind of, although Denis Villeneuve directed Blade Runner 2049, I guess it's kind of the second in a line of a sequel to a Denis Villeneuve film that we perhaps didn't need.
Yeah.
The first movie, I think, rounded everything off perfectly. It really didn't need to continue. Everything was rounded off. And I think going into this second movie, I didn't watch any of the trailers at all. I think I may have caught like a short trailer at the start of, I think it was like Deadpool 2 or something when I went to see that. But I really didn't follow the trailers or the clips or anything for this movie. I wanted to go in cold. When I saw that Denis Villeneuve wasn't attached to this as director, I think he was an executive producer or something like that, I did kind of worry for this movie. I think that watching both of these films back to back now, you can clearly see which one had the stronger directorial vision, and that was the first one. Not to take anything away from, oh God, who's the director of this movie? Stefano Sollima. I think he does direct a solid movie with this one, but I mean, it's fair to say that this second one, Soldado, isn't as strong as that first one. And I'm trying to work out why that is. We saw that it's exactly the same writer. Maybe it's because of that shift of director. But I think, to me, where this movie falls down on is that there isn't really a clear-cut main character. With that first movie, you had
Emily
that character. Yeah, you had Emily Blunt's character. Yeah, and she was sort of, and these are always my favorite films that do this, where she's like a window to the audience. She's very green at the beginning of that film. She's a character that wants more. She wants a more involved line of her career because she really doesn't feel like she's making a difference. And then she kind of gets swept up into this world that's completely beyond her control and beyond her imagination. And then by the end of that movie, we get the sense that she's been changed by this and she's probably seen too much and she can't handle a life like that. And there really wasn't a character like that in this movie. We kind of bank on the supporting characters, which were Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. And they're both great characters and they both have a lot of past to them, probably Benicio del Toro more. But they don't feel strong enough or grounded enough to be that main character. They worked in that supporting role, but I don't know how quite well they translate into the main role in this movie.
Yeah. To be honest, it's difficult because they were both supporting characters in the first movie. And I'd say for this movie, I'd say with the first half of the movie, Josh Brolin was the lead character. The second half of the movie, Benicio del Toro was the main character. And it didn't feel like a perfect juggling of how it could have been done. If I was to give one immediate flaw for this film, the pacing was nowhere near as good as the first one. This film has it has some ups, has some downs, and it stutters it gets going good, but then it stutters, and I don't think it fully recovers from that.
Yeah. For me, the weakest part of this movie is the ending. I was actually kind of gutted by the ending, and it felt very slapped together last minute.
Very anticlimactic. Yeah. A little bit cheesy, I'd say, as well, which is something that we wanted to avoid from the first film.
Yeah, because the first movie, you had that whole running gunfight through the tunnels, and then you had like your big sort of emotional closure to the film with Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro. With this movie, they kind of sacrificed that in order to sequel bait. And it feels like now the only reason this movie exists is because of the success of the first movie. You're right there, Tate. And the necessity to bank on a franchise. And because, you know, we can't just have a movie on its own now. We've got to make a trilogy out of everything. And that really feels what this movie is about.
The second they made the decision to make the second film, I knew everyone would have known that it would have been a third film.
Yeah.
And this film definitely suffers from it. And it's almost the first half of the film does work well, and it works well as a Sicario film. You have that kind of tension, maybe not between the cartels and the American government, but the American government and the Mexican government for sure. You have that tension in there. And then they decide to swap out the second half of the film to try and build up an area to which they can move on for another film. And because of that, I would say that the final act, the final 20 to 30 minutes of the film, has little to no tension, which is really disappointing, especially seeing as this film does have some great scenes which build up the tension. One scene in particular, which I'd say was really, really worked well, was the blockade. It's a scene which I'd say the tension was very similar and very well built, similar to the bridge scene in the first film. And it's one of those, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of, we want to build tension, so we want to put them in a very isolated situation and see how slowly the tension can rise, and everything can kind of work itself out.
I think the first movie, I know what you mean, and that was actually probably one of my favorite scenes in this movie. It felt like it's like a trope now with these, I guess what we will eventually call the Sicario trilogy, in that you have to have that 1 10-minute scene where they're driving from one location to the other and something goes awry. In the first movie, I think it was handled better from a direction standpoint because you did play on that essence of silence and uneasiness and not knowing where the enemy could be. This one, they essentially get caught. They're driving along a road that isn't paved and it's kicking up loads of sand, so their vision is obscured. And it's similar, but I don't think they worked it as well. Like in terms of like crafting, in terms of filmmaking, everything like that, I don't think it hit me quite as hard as that scene did from the first movie. If we're talking about other supporting characters and stuff, Isabel Mona plays a character called Isabella Reyes in this movie. I thought she was fantastic in this movie.
She was brilliant.
I'd only seen her in Transformers the last night before this movie, and even though that film is still one of the worst movies I've ever seen in the movie theater, maybe even the worst, she was okay with the material she had in that film, but you could tell that she was an actress that would go on to do better things.
Chris, I can tell you now, you would have seen a worse film. You maybe not in the movie.
Indiana Jones 4?
But you definitely would have seen a worse film.
Oh. Yeah, but you know what? High Rise isn't 3 hours long. Is it close to it? It's going to be close to it now, isn't it?
No, it's 2 hours.
Okay. I would... right, I'm going to go out 11. I would rather watch High Rise twice in a row than watch The Last Night again. I put that challenge to you, sir. But no, I thought Isabella Mona was great in the film. I will say that perhaps they play on the whole her getting kidnapped angle a few too many times in this movie. Yes. I think I make a drinking game out of this movie, how many times this character gets kidnapped. And because of that, the end of the movie did feel a little bit like Taken to me. Or like I actually watched Commando the night before it was on TV. I did a Commando and Sicario 1 double feature.
Wow.
And it's weird how Commando is all about his daughter gets kidnapped and he has to lead a mission to get her back. Very, very similar to the outcome of this movie.
One thing that I will say about her, the first scene that she's in, I'm going to try not to spoil it, but basically she gets into a fight.
Yeah.
And the aftermath where she's basically being told off, she controls that scene. She is in charge of that scene. And I could tell from that first scene that she was in, you could immediately tell, okay, this is going to be a good performance from her. And almost every single scene, I noticed that the camera would always kind of pivot back to her. So even if she wasn't the main focus of the interaction, she would always kind of have a key part in every single scene. And I think it worked. And that element of it, her being kind of a person who's been kidnapped and has to be kind of saved from the situation, works for the film, but it's just, there's something missing from the execution. I don't know if it's the pacing. I don't know if it's the fact they had to set up for the sequel. The bond that she got with Benicio del Toro's character was good.
Yeah.
I truly felt that. And it was a nice callback to have Benicio del Toro do the sign language again. I can't remember.
I don't think that was established.
Did he do that in the first one? Was there a scene where he did some sign language or something like that?
Maybe. I watched it yesterday and I can't even remember now. I don't believe there was a reference to his daughter being deaf. I think that was just dropped in this movie.
Okay.
I could be wrong. If anyone is watching and remembers Sicario more than I do, having watched it only a day ago.
Yesterday.
I know.
But yeah, no.
It actually, you mentioned that the end of this film almost turned into a Western. With that whole like father-daughter angle, it reminded me a lot of Logan, actually.
I was going to say that as well. Even the kind of the situation of being in like a desert and kind of being stranded together.
That like strive to carry on like through all like the physical hardship he goes through.
Well, Chris, here is the question: young Mexican or Hispanic-based actors, are they the future?
They're apparently the future. Yes. No, I did like that angle, and that is kind of the emotional center of the entire movie, really, which only really comes into it, I'd say, about halfway through. But I thought both those actors played it very well. And then going back to like Emily Blunt, they kind of try to do something similar, not to the degree they do in this one, but there's that whole angle in the first movie where Benicio del Toro sees Emily Blunt's character as reminding him heavily of his daughter. And there's that protective quality, and they kind of take that to the next degree in this one with almost like this girl Isabella could be his adoptive daughter by the end of this movie.
So the next film, what you're saying is he's going to have an actual kid.
I think it's got to go that way. I think that's the only closure he's going to get, because he can kill as many people as he wants. I think in the next movie we're going to have him killing like the big head honcho, who he's going after, Isabella's father. Do
you think it's going to be a... Oh, no, I can't say that. I can't say that.
It's so difficult to talk about.
I can't say that. I was about to say
something already.
I was about to say something massive then. Okay, let's move on to music.
It was kind of like one droney tone repeated all the way through, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It worked though, but like it was, to me, it was a film where you don't really focus on the music. The music's kind of an underlying tone to it.
Tension building music. So it's the kind of music that's implemented just for the purpose of the scene, not to be a kind of big kind of score to kind of establish anything. It's just there to kind of pump up the tension and pump up the action, but it's not something that you'd put on in the back like.
It's a lot of low synths. It's like a lot of pulses in the background as sort of like this political intrigues going on.
Reasonably generic.
I've just had a look who's done the music to this film, and I am not even going to halfway pretend to pronounce that name at all.
Oh, go on, Chris. Go on.
Oh, there's punctuation in this name that I've never even seen before. Hilda Guanadotier?
I'm trying to find an IMDb where I can find this person, but I can't.
I'll see what else they've done. Is a classically trained Icelandic cellist. Did the music to this film then, apparently.
Guðnadóttir.
We are like, if this guy is like watching this,
it's a woman to start off with.
This woman, I'm making it worse. Move on.
Move on. Cinematography.
It was fine. You could tell that it wasn't the same. It was oh god, who was it from the first movie? It was Roger Deakins in the first movie, wasn't it? Who worked on him with 2049. You can tell that it's not Roger Deakins. I'll say that. It wasn't a bad film to look at by any stretch of the imagination, but there was, rewatching that first movie again last night, there were a lot of shots that genuinely are beautiful. There's one that's great when it's building towards the end and you've got the army and they're trekking across the desert and there's this like beautiful sunset as it's just about to go to nighttime.
Yeah.
And the soldiers like walk past the sun into the desert, into the darkness and disappear as they're about to go on their mission. Like stuff like that in the first movie. You don't really get anything like that in this one. Wasn't a bad film to look at, but nothing really jumped out to me from a cinematic level.
Okay, so I guess we go to recommendations and then we'll go on to a short spoiler section.
Yeah.
So would you recommend this?
Recommendation. This isn't a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's a perfectly directed, well-made movie with some great performances throughout. In fact, I don't think there are really particularly any bad performances that really jumped out to me as being glaringly bad. It's a well put together movie. However, it's next to impossible not to be able to compare this to its original, to the predecessor, which is by far a superior movie, a tighter written movie. It just moves a better pace. It's better directed. And it's a movie that didn't really need a sequel. If you can overlook that and you're just going for a sort of political intrigue, drug cartel thriller with some tense moments to it, you're going to like this movie. I enjoyed this movie, but comparing it to the first one, which is impossible not to, it is definitely a significant step back from its predecessor.
You could, I've only just realized, you could probably watch this movie without seeing the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, there really isn't all that much context linking back to the first one.
So saying that, I'd say if you haven't seen the first film, and you can't be asked to see the first film, first of all, go see the first film. But if you can't be asked to see the first film, you can go watch this film and just have a good time.
I do usually like sequels like that, though, that you can kind of watch on their own terms.
The first film was a bit too good, maybe.
Yeah. They peaked too soon a little bit. Here's a question for you. Do you think this movie would have been better had they'd brought back Emily Blunt's character?
Yes.
Because I was just trying to think of that.
She grounded the film, the
Yeah.
first film. She was kind of the central beating heart of it. You had a character you could actually follow. If you had her as a main character, the fact that she was quite divisive in her decisions in the first film, and she influenced the characters, and the characters were influenced on her. The fact that you at least had kind of an emotional beating heart, aside from the story which is implemented into it. Having that character already established, and having that character who's already post the first film, and kind of the implications of how that ended, she could have been a very, very interesting character to follow. And I think her role in it would have been kind of more of a questionable figure, and one who was definitely kind of sitting on the fence in what the actions of this film were. And maybe would have been, because I know the tagline for this film was "No limits this time." There was limits in the first film. The limits were broken. There were no limits in this film, and I think her character would have provided some intrigue into that setup. So yes, I'm going to say she would have made the film a lot better.
I'm trying to think whereabouts you could have implemented a character, because
I think having her character in a similar role to the first film. So the first film, she was brought in, she was a brand new person. After seeing what happened in the first film, maybe starting to see her turn into not a dirtier kind of soldier, but one who starts to question a bit more about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe with the character of Isabella Reyes, maybe her interactions with her and her handling of the situation would have provided some needed tension in the film. Because I'd say Del Toro's character and Josh Brolin's character, there isn't any heat between the two of them that you would have kind of expected. It's more of like a friendship which is on work grounds, and if work grounds comes in the way of that friendship,
then they go separate ways.
Well, it's work grounds. You needed someone in there to provide that tension. And in the first film, can I spoil the first film by saying what I'm about to say?
Go on.
The first film with Emily Blunt walking away from the situation and saying, "No, this is wrong. You need to be put in check." Having that kind of character sat in the background, knowing what had been done, and knowing that it was wrong, and having her own standpoint on that, would have created a bit more tension. Not just kind of the tension created between the two sides in this film, but it would have created tension within the team itself.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because at the end of that movie, when she walks away, that kind of completes her character in many ways. And if you were to bring her back for this movie, you would have to find a compelling reason enough to bring her back into the conflict.
I would say government mandated. She gets a promotion in some other place or something like that, and she actually heads the mission or co-heads the mission.
Or maybe the events of the first movie changed her in a way that when she has gone back to normality, she can't now. Maybe because she has dipped her toe into this world. It's kind of like that. I do actually.
She could always be brought on for the third film, because now they're looking. Maybe. Yeah, she could definitely be brought on.
Because watching that first movie again last night, I drew a lot of parallels between Emily Blunt's character and the likes of Clarice Starling, for example, from Silence of the Lambs. How she starts very green, she wants to do better, she wants to go into like this darker stuff, but by the end of it, it kind of consumes her, and she almost wants a way out. And maybe you could have brought her back for a sequel in saying that those events have changed her, and now that she has experienced that life, she's finding it very hard to go back to normality. You could have done that. I don't know if that would have been a bit of lazy writing. And even if you did have Emily Blunt, I don't know if that would have muddied the water between the interaction between Isabella and Benicio del Toro, because as I said in that first movie, you kind of did have that father-daughter connection a little bit with Emily Blunt. So would that have confused that? Would they have gone with like a Ripley motherly figure with Newt to Isabella?
I think the figure she would have been with was she would have completely disagreed with the mission in the first place. And even when they took the kid, she would have had some resentment towards the kid because she didn't agree with what they were doing. She would be there as just a standard soldier who maybe kind of gives that snide look in the background to the kid or to Benicio del Toro. If Benicio del Toro is cozying up with the kid, then she would be seen as kind of the figure who kind of looks on and not happy. So it could work in that sense. But anyway, let's go on to a couple of spoilers. So if you haven't seen Soldado, then please go and watch it. I'd recommend it.
There are only 13 people in my cinema, including me.
There wasn't that many in mine, to be honest. But I think that might have something to do with the World Cup.
Yes, definitely.
Mind you, I saw it on a day where there was no World Cup matches, so
it has been very hot in the UK though, and people probably don't want to spend their days locked in a very dark, boiling room of a cinema.
There's the two people who are locked inside boiling dark rooms. Let's spoiler-wise. I want to start off at the start of the film. And then we'll talk about the big kind of thing that we both have issues with in this film, which is the ending.
Yeah.
The start of this film was, I know I want gritty realism, and I know there has been some complaints about this film from that starting sequence of the terrorist attacks, especially that the scene with the woman and the child walking towards the terrorists and her saying it's all going to be okay and him blowing it anyway. That's a good start. That's a good start to a film that immediately sets the tone. So if anyone hasn't seen the first film, they'll go into the cinema, they'll see that, and they'll immediately know, okay, that's where we're at.
These are the stakes. This is the current world we're living in. I will say though, watching that scene, and it was shocking, and you knew it was coming, but the explosion still did make me jump a little bit. The radius of the explosion itself, it almost looks like she would have survived the blast had she have just stayed where she was. Because the actual radius of the explosion didn't look like it would be far-reaching enough to get her from the other side of the shop. But I guess in that situation, you want to get out, don't you?
You want to stay in the shop with the person with explosives.
Yeah.
Do you want to try and make an attempt to reason with them and get out? I think that's quite funny because I was watching 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, and the end of that series, spoiler alert anyway, for 30 Reasons Why, has one of the dumbest endings ever. There's going to be a terrorist attack on the school. You haven't seen it, have you?
I haven't, but continue. Continue and give me the thumbs up.
Anyway, there's a terrorist attack on the school, and the main character decides to talk down the person holding a gun, which is ridiculous. Why would you stand in front of the person holding the gun and try and talk down the person who is holding a live and active weapon? It's a stupid ending which has received so much criticism. But I feel like that is very similar to the situation that this film puts in. However, this film and situation treats it how it should have been done and not how it shouldn't have been done in that sense.
And I didn't realize you watched it. No, I haven't watched it yet. And it's kind of a series that's on the back burner for me still. And I've stayed away from spoilers to an extent. I know that there's probably some terrorist thing involved now, but we'll leave it at that.
Not really, Chris. Not really.
Okay. But no, jumping off that point, I did actually like some of the tension building. I liked the scene with Josh Brolin at the beginning as well, where he apprehends a Somalian terrorist as well. The interrogation, how he's got an airstrike triggered over the guy's house, and he says that the guy thinks that he's just bluffing, and then he blows up the house. Again,
I will find the right brother.
Yeah, that stuff was great, and that stuff was easing me into the movie. But even then, I was kind of waiting for that main character role to take over, which never kind of happened throughout this movie.
I think it doesn't help with the fact that Josh Brolin's character, I've always seen him as more of an office type character instead of the man on the front lines.
He's just kind of the machismo spewing guy who heads the mission, really, isn't he? Kind of gets everything.
But you see, Benicio del Toro is the guy with the gun. He is the guy who's going to go and eliminate the people in a cool or flashy way, or something like that. But you see Josh Brolin's character as the person who's definitely heading the mission from the office bound. And he's the person who pulls the strings in the background. But he isn't really kind of the head of the action as percents. But this film didn't really juggle it well with the main characters. I think they should have introduced Benicio del Toro a little bit earlier.
I will say, though, I am glad, because it would have been very easy for them to make Isabella's character the main character. And I don't think it would have worked at all had you have had that child actor as the main
What about
character.
the... I can't remember his name, but we'll call him the gun character. The kid, Elijah Rodriguez, who plays Miguel Hernandez.
The guy who's sort of being brought up into the cartel world and drafted into that. He was fine, but to me, there wasn't really enough scenes dedicated to him in order to really
it was one of those. I'd say it was a kind of, it's a situation you introduce a character and you think, okay, this has nothing to do with Josh Brolin at the moment, and this has nothing to do with Benicio del Toro at the moment. which means it's going to have everything to do with them in the final act.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for it. And now we get to that one scene which pisses me off. Actually, the one scene beforehand which didn't piss me off as much, the bus scene, where
that was
they
great.
kind of have an interrogation and he kind of plays on with it to start with, but he doesn't even look phased, Benicio del Toro, throughout that entire scene. And then suddenly you have the shooting in the desert. I thought first off that maybe it was going to be one of those Christopher Nolan twists where bumping into him, they stop the car and he pulls him over and's like,
so there's like a deleted scene almost.
If you get into that kind of situation where you're in the desert and you're pulling the trigger, or we know who you are, we've been monitoring you and shit like that. And he's already working on his side, and he says, "I'm gonna have my mouth open. You need to shoot me in the mouth."
Yeah,
or something like that. Instead, it was just him shooting and missing badly, and
I think it's conflicting though. When we get to the very, very end of this movie, like literally the final scene of this movie, I think it's conflicting. Like you read it in a different way to me. You read it in that he shot him at point blank range, missed the head, shot him through the mouth, and it came out the other side, and that was that. He thought he killed him. I thought he purposely did that to keep him alive because we see the scene where he jumps off the back of the wagon as it's driving away.
Yeah, but
I thought he was going to walk back to Benicio del Toro and check on him.
I would have thought that if that was the way and that was organized and he walked back to the site, then that would have been fine. But it's the fact that he walked away and we don't actually know where he goes.
Yeah.
I think that's him just walking away from that life. He doesn't want that side of life.
Do you think there was a lot cut out of the ending of this movie?
Yes, I do.
They do a Josh Trank Fantastic Four move at the very, very end of this movie where it skips forward a year, and there's a lot that isn't tied up.
You didn't need a year forward added onto that because he's sat in the back office now. He's the guy who doesn't want part of any of the action. He's sat in the back office.
Like tattoo sleeves
tattoos and stuff like that. That immediately tells you that time has passed. And then seeing the scar of Benicio del Toro tells time has passed. But I'm asking this question of you, possibly the last question before I go and eat food. Chris, should Benicio del Toro have stayed dead?
I think if they'd have killed him off, it would have been an incredibly ballsy move. I would have liked to have seen, if they had have killed him off, I think this should have been the final one. And I think we should have got some resolution with Josh Brolin maybe feeling bad.
If Benicio del Toro had been killed, would that leave Emily Blunt to come in and fill up the space?
I could see that happening. I don't know if you could have done a third one with without Benicio del Toro. Sorry. I think had you have killed him off, you could have had a moment with Josh Brolin where, although he's still the very sort of like stern, stoic, like, you know, the leader kind of character, like with no emotional attachment, you could see that act of him extracting her from the situation and saving her as his final gesture to Benicio del Toro, in that he did get her across the border. He is getting her into witness protection and she will have a better life now. And that will kind of be Benicio del Toro's legacy. You could have spun it that way, and that would have been a very emotional end to the movie. When he pulled the car over at the end, when he's like bleeding out of his mouth, and he's like driving down the highway and he kind of slumps to the side, I thought, this is it. This is where he's going to die. And then, like, as he continues down, I was expecting... Well, first I was conscious of the running time and thinking, like, it's got to be wrapping up soon, but it feels like there's still loads more that needs to be wrapped up. The whole, like, the US politics with, like, the Secretary of Defense and everything like that. That wasn't really resolved. That's kind of left up in the air. Where Josh Brolin's left at the end of this movie, and that he has kind of tried to clean everything up, but he has taken this girl, which was against his orders. What happened in that 1 year period with Benicio del Toro? All these questions have been left unanswered. Whether these are all going to be answered in the next movie, I don't know, but I think that it's probably just going to pick up where we left off at the end of this one. In all honesty, the very, very last shot of this movie, it seemed like it was reshoots to me. It felt studio mandated, like, we need a trilogy.
That would make sense.
Kind of scene in at the end.
It had some extras in it, but not as many as that was there previously.
It felt like if you'd have taken away that 1 year later moment and you'd have added like an extra, maybe 10, 15 minutes. 15 minutes might be a bit too long. Maybe 10 minutes. And that would have been your equivalent of the emotional resolution of the first movie. That as like your epilogue.
Have him basically sit him down, close the door, and actually listen into the chat, and have him kind of very similar to the first film where he's sat at the Don's table and he's just like kind of monologuing and stuff like that with the family. and that whole scene out of the tunnels, it would have been really, really tense to see him just kind of face up to him and stuff like that, and like ask him a question like, "Did you shoot me in the mouth because you wanted me to live?"
Yeah,
like that, and kind of keep that kind of tension.
See, that's why I like that it is ambiguous, but I do think he did it intentionally, and I think we'll see that in the next movie, because essentially this movie ends where he's almost going to draft in this kid as his apprentice kind of thing, or someone to follow in his footsteps, and I don't think that was earned throughout the movie. The two characters really didn't have any time together. If they did have time together and they did organize that he would get shot through the mouth, then that was never shown on screen, so we can't take that as actual fact. So I guess where I'm at the standpoint now is I'm going to have to wait for the third one and see if it does recall back, if it does flash back to any moments. But maybe it will be like this movie where the third one you can almost watch on its own. But how the ending's framed in this one, it's the classic trilogy structure, really, isn't it? The first movie kind of sets everything up, and you can have that as its own, you know, its own entity, its own one movie. And very often or not, the second one will end on a cliffhanger ending, which will link you into a third one, which might be filmed back to back or might be out in a year's time. I don't think they're going to leave it as long as the time was between the first and the second movie. I think we will probably see a third one in like 2 years' time tops.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the ending is what really let it down for me, because I think that it still wouldn't have been as strong as the first movie, but I think you could have had a solid standalone movie. But the fact that they saw the need to sequel bait at the end and to sacrifice some good, solid epilogue resolution at the end of this film, I think that really does hurt the journey that the rest of this movie goes. Because even if you weren't enjoying it as much as the first one, there was still a lot of stuff that I was enjoying in this movie. I did want to see payoff and come to some kind of conclusion, and unfortunately it doesn't. And I think that I think a lot of people were confused at the end as well. Like the credits came up and a lot of people were like, oh, that's it. Okay.
I was like,
it's that 1 year jump is so sudden, and it really took me out of the movie. And it's such a shame that, you know, a movie can be fantastic, but what stays in your mind when you leave that theater is those final moments of a film. And like a poor ending to a movie can almost ruin your entire experience. It didn't ruin my experience, but it definitely dampened it when we get to the end of this thing.
It made it a little bit less. Yeah, it definitely took away from it.
Yeah. But I guess that will wrap up our review. We've kind of given our recommendation on it. I'd still say it's a solid movie. I hate giving a review out of 10. If I was giving a review out of 10, I'd probably sit it at a 7. Maybe.
Yeah, 7.5, maybe.
Somewhere like that, yeah.
Don't take away from the fact that it's a good film. It is a good film, but we're comparing it to the first film, which was a phenomenal film.
Yeah.
Possibly one of those films that will stand out within the next 10 or so years. Up there with the best films of the last decade. And when you're kind of putting up a sequel and it's got to try and compete with that, it's just not going to happen. I'm just trying to think, actually, off the top of my head, best films, Chris. Name a few of the last decade.
Best, wow.
I'd say Whiplash. I want to say 2049 because I really enjoyed it.
See, I've almost forgotten that movie.
Ex Machina.
Ex Machina, definitely. I wouldn't say Logan, but definitely in the superhero genre, that movie probably.
Yeah.
I'd have to give thought to that. We see so many movies, I lose track, in all honesty.
Maybe we should do some sort of list or something like that.
That'd definitely be good in movies that we think are going to have longevity in the future. Definitely. So that'll do it for our review on Sicario, Day of the Soldado, Sicario 2, Soldado. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this movie. Did you enjoy it? How would you rank it compared to the first one? And are you excited to see a third one if it ever happens and we get a trilogy of these things? Anything Sicario related, please do drop us a comment. I am conscious that our activity on the channel hasn't been up to par as of late. That's kind of on me. There are a lot of reaction videos that I have recorded which I need to get edited for the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse trailer that came out, and the slew of horror films we've had with Halloween, The Nun, and Predator. So they will be up with this week. I guarantee that. I'm sorry that people have been waiting for those. And I believe we have a season 2 approaching of a certain show.
Yes, we do. We are going to be restarting a film club. And I'm really excited about this one. I've got a list of films which are ready to go. And yes, Chris, I've changed them since last time.
Okay.
And we're going to be starting off with the first one, which is going to be, I believe it's Andrew Niccol. Let me just check. Andrew Niccol. Yes, Andrew Niccol, who has done some great films in the past where he's been writer on. He wrote The Truman Show. He wrote Gattaca, which Gattaca, if anyone didn't know, is my favorite film of all time. But we're not going to be looking at Gattaca, although it was very tempting, because I know that Chris has seen Gattaca.
I have seen it. It's been a long time ago. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as you did, but I can see. I can certainly see the elements of that.
It's my favorite film of all time, and it'd take a lot to top it. But we're going to go with one of his other attempts at some films, and I'm going to say this now. This is a brilliant concept, and maybe it wasn't executed to the best it could have been, but it's still a damn good, entertaining film, and that is In Time, the 2011 film starring Justin Timberlake and Amanda Seyfried and Cillian Murphy.
Oh, okay.
And I think you're going to enjoy it.
I honestly don't know anything about this movie. This is why I like film clubs so much, because I know, like, it started off like George was on the first episode, and then after that, like, I kind of took over and was, you know, the sort of the subject, if you will, of all like the films that you pick.
I'll say this now, Chris. This has one of the most fantastic kind of ideas for a film that I've ever seen, and I'd love to see either a remake of this or a sequel. I know that it was made in 2011, and it's quite early on. But the idea of this film in the first place has so much. You could do so much with it. It's incredible. So we'll try and get that out possibly for next week at some point.
Yeah, I think we're looking at next week. We'll discuss what Film Club actually is, but I'm very glad that it's coming back, and it gives me a chance to watch some new movies. Like, it's very easy to fall into the trap, even when you do movie reviews and stuff like that. You're seeing new movies every week, like up-to-date ones.
Let's go back in time, man. Yeah, let's go see some films.
Yeah, like, you know, there's still hundreds and hundreds of classic movies that I haven't watched yet. And Film Club is that show that's helping slowly chip away at some of those movies that I really need to get
very, very slowly. We haven't decided yet on whether it's going to be a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We do have the old-timey scoreboard that we had from the first series. I could do a very quick rundown of what we did in the first series.
I think we'll save that for Film Club, because we want to round off on that. But we've got that show coming back sometime next week. As I said, reactions from me. And I think in 2 weeks' time, we're coming back with a brand new Battle of the Brackets episode, which I can announce now is the worst movie sequel. There are a lot of bad sequels out there, but one of them is going to top the list. That's one of our favorite shows to do on the channel. So there is stuff happening on the channel. We're not going anywhere. We're still going to be bringing content out. We apologize that it's been a bit slow recently, but stick around, hit the bell icon so you're updated every time we go live, because we tend to do pretty much just do live streams all the time now. Hit the subscribe button. That'll do it for us for right now. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.